How's everybody doing? Okay? Yeah. All right. We'll call our, the defense can call our next witness.
Pam Gould.
Ms. Pam Gould? Okay, ma'am, come on up. Just watch your step, please. If you could do me a favor, could you put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay, get yourself seated and comfortable. And once you are, can you state your full name for the record and spell your last name, please?
Pamela Gould, G-O-U-L-D.
Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to do me one favor. During the course of your testimony, please keep your voice up. Jurors number 15 and 16 in the back corner over there, they need to hear you.
Okay.
Okay? All right, thank you. Ms. Mastalone, go ahead.
Good morning. Ms. Gould, can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Pam Gould, officially Pamela, but I use Pam.
And what is your current occupation?
I am retired.
And what's your educational background?
I graduated from Montclair State College in December of 1984 with a bachelor's in business administration.
And are you married to Dr. Jack Gould, who we just heard from?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously we just heard from your husband, so we already have, background. We know that you and your husband were neighbors with the Caneiros for many years. So I just want to focus on the nature of your relationship with them.
Okay.
Generally, can you describe your relationship with Paul and his family and how it developed over time?
We were very, very close for 25 years or so when we were back neighbors. They moved in about 6 months after we did. Our children are all about a year staggered apart. So the kids became fast friends, and we became fast friends. Over the years, we became closer and closer, really extended family.
And what kind of things did your family and the Caneiro family do together?
A lot of hanging out in our backyards, but we also vacationed together, dinners out, dinners in, movies. We went to a couple Broadway shows, traveled a couple times together as families, lots of barbecues in our backyards.
So did you consider yourself and your family close to the Caneiro family?
Extremely.
And did you consider them like family?
Absolutely. Extended family for sure.
And in the Caneiro family, who were you? How often would you see the Caneiros?
Susan and I spent much more time together than with the kids when they were younger, but Susan and I would spend maybe 2-3 days a week together, sometimes more. In the summer, we would just be out in the yard with the kids, but on average, probably 2 to 3 times a week.
Were there times when you would see her more than that?
Yeah, for sure. In the summers, we would basically see almost daily. If the weather was good, we'd be outside with kids playing. They had a pool, we had a pool. We would go back and forth between the 2 yards.
And since you were close with Susan and Paul and their family, and spent a lot of time together, including the summer barbecues and things of that nature, did you also have the occasion to spend time with Keith and Jennifer Caneiro and their family?
Yes.
And can you explain how you came to know them?
Well, they were always present for Christmas Eve, was always at the Caneiro house. So Keith and Jen were always there with some other people, on and off, whoever it was that year, but they were there every year for Christmas Eve. And then when we would just be in the yard, if it was a barbecue or one of the kids' birthdays or a 4th of July weekend holiday, they would come over and spend the day in the yard with the Caneiro family and my family.
And so based on how well you knew the Caneiro family, how would you describe Paul?
Paul is very intelligent, very well read, sometimes opinionated, but a very kind, giving soul.
And would you consider him like a helpful person?
Extremely helpful. He would offer up advice and physical help whenever there was a problem with our pool or our internet, which I'm sure my husband spoke about,
Yes.
that kind of stuff.
You mentioned, what was his demeanor like? Was he generally, what was his demeanor like?
He was very jovial and even-tempered.
Even-tempered?
Even-tempered, yes. Never saw him lose his temper, yell, scream, nothing like that.
Okay. And based on how well you knew Paul and Keith and the interactions, like the frequency you would see them and your interactions with them, I want to ask you about the nature of their relationship. How would you describe Keith and Paul's relationship?
Very close. Very close.
And can you explain more about that?
Paul was very protective of Keith, took care of Keith, that I saw personally, but we also heard stories of when they were growing up.
So I don't want to elicit any hearsay, nothing that anyone else said.
Okay.
Just based on your personal knowledge and what you know and what you've observed and what you've seen, is there anything else that you can tell us about just, either the bond between Keith and Paul or how close they were, things of that nature?
They were very close. They spent a lot of time together, obviously working together, but also outside of work. They spent a lot of time together.
And what about when Keith went back to school?
Paul was 100% supportive.
And do you have any knowledge of how Paul and Keith might typically handle disagreements with each other?
I believe they talked them out, never saw anything physical. Sometimes it would get a little contentious or tense, but it was always hashed out, and then they would pick up where they left off, go get something for lunch or dinner, and have a laugh.
And I also want to ask you about Paul and his relationship with Jesse and Sophia. How would you describe that?
Paul loved those kids like his own, especially had a very close bond with Jesse.
And when you say a close bond with Jesse, are you aware of any specific things that they would do together?
I know they did lunch dates from time to time, and you could just see the bond when they were together. They would just connect.
And are you aware of any renovations that Paul and Susan had in their house?
Yes.
And what was the approximate time frame of the renovations?
It was over the course of a couple years. I don't remember what years those were, but it was over the course of a few years.
Was it like closer to, if you could just approximate, was it like after 2015 or around that time or
Probably
closer?
around 2015.
Around then?
I think so.
And you said over the course of a few years?
A couple years, yeah.
Okay. And can you tell us, based on your knowledge, like what do you know about the renovations?
It was a full house reno, done room by room. Bathrooms, kitchen, new floors, sheetrock, moldings, everything was replaced and updated.
And how did Paul, like when he would talk about the renovations, how did he express himself? Without saying what he said, but what was your general impression?
Oh, he was very excited. He was very involved he did a lot of research on all the products, and he was very excited about updating everything and like to talk about it a lot.
And was there anything,
Sorry.
are you aware of a backpack that Paul typically had?
I know he had a backpack, yes.
Okay, and do you know where he kept it or where?
I believe it stayed in the car most of the time.
And I want to draw your attention to November 19th of 2018. Do you remember that?
I do.
And what, if anything, was special about that day?
That was my birthday.
And did you do anything that day to celebrate it with anyone in the Caneiro family?
Susan came over in the afternoon and we had a cup of tea.
And do you know around what time that was?
Probably around 2:30 or so till about 4:30.
And to your knowledge, where was Paul at that time?
He was sleeping.
Okay. And do you know, to your knowledge, do you know why?
Objection.
Sustained. Out. Sorry. Come on up.
Based on how well you knew the Caneiro family, was it usual or unusual, either way, for Paul to be sleeping around that time?
It happened periodically. It wasn't a daily thing, but it did happen periodically.
Okay. And do you know why?
Objection.
Don't answer that. Ladies and gentlemen, can you go in the jury room for a second, please? Everybody can be seated. And so for the record, we're outside the presence of the jury. How do you know that he would be sleeping at times during the day?
Susan would tell me.
Right. And as to why he would be sleeping, how would you know that information?
Susan would tell me that he was having a headache.
Okay. All right. So that's all hearsay. I'm not going to allow those questions to be asked. So, Ms. Masalone, I had said it already at sidebar. We went back to it again. I'm ordering you not to do that, to go down that line of questioning now that we know for sure. We've heard the answer from the juror. So we will allow the direct to continue. I heard one go into the bathroom, so we'll just check that. As soon as they're not in the bathroom anymore, we'll bring them back out, okay? Yes. All right.
Can I just put my position on the record, which is simply that even if it is hearsay, it falls under the exception of state of mind and present medical condition. I understand the court had a prior ruling with respect to the time frame of when Keith was on the phone with Paul that evening. And the court had a concern, I guess, about the issue of reliability, but I think asking this witness generally over time why Mr. Caneiro would be typically sleeping at a certain time during the day, and referencing a medical issue, that was the reason, that there is an issue of reliability, because there's no reason for, that's the whole purpose of hearsay, is we don't want to elicit statements out of court that are unreliable, but this would be a reliable statement because we're just talking about generalities and over time, and this is earlier in the day, so I don't, even if it is hearsay, I think it does fall under an exception, and that's all there.
Ms. Wallace, do you want to respond?
If a statement submitted is hearsay, that doesn't fall under the state of mind exception because the state of mind would not be relevant to anything. It's squarely hearsay. The defense filed 1,000 motions over the summer that this could have been hashed out then. The state filed motions to bring in certain hearsay that were heard. The state's position is that this does not fall under state of mind evidence.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to hold it against the defense for not bringing this out based upon certain case law that exists. However, I do agree that under the state of mind exception to the hearsay rule, I do not find this to be relevant to the circumstances here. I find that whether it's reliable or not, That's not the reason that the court is not going to be allowing this information. It's the question really is for this court is what is the relevance to this information as it relates to this case. I don't find it to, one, be relevant, nor, number two, do I find it fits under the exception of the state of mind and or any other hearsay exception. So therefore, I'm not going to allow that question to be asked. And ma'am, I'm going to also order you, now you're hearing me saying what I'm saying, you are not allowed to just elicit or just say that information.
Okay.
All right, because I'm saying right now that that information should not go before the jury, okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, I appreciate that. So as soon as we have our jurors ready, we'll bring them back out. Direct examination, go ahead.
So we were discussing November 19th of 2018, and it was your birthday. Later that night, did you celebrate your birthday?
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the next thing that happened after that?
Katie, Mr. Caneiro's daughter, called us at shortly after 5 in the morning to tell us that there was a fire at their house and we should get our dogs and get out of the house in case there was a chance of it jumping to our house.
Okay. And did you see the Caneiro family at all that morning?
I did not.
Okay. And what was the reason for that?
We couldn't get to them through the backyard because of all of the fire activity. We couldn't get around on the street side because it was all blocked off.
And did Susan spend the night with you that night?
Yes.
And obviously a lot of time has passed since November of 2018. Are you still close with the Caneiro family?
Yes, very much.
Thank you.
Cross.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, Ms. Gould.
Good morning.
Just a couple of questions. You indicated that you would see Mr. Caneiro and interact with his brother and Jennifer and the kids on occasions?
Yes.
And I think you indicated that those would be, or maybe you didn't, but what kinds of occasions would those be?
Christmas Eve always, and then if there was a birthday party for one of the girls, or a barbecue on the weekend, haphazardly, sometimes a holiday, sometimes just to have a barbecue.
Okay, so it was on rare occasions that you would see them interact.
Occasional.
And it would be during happy times, right?
Yes.
Vacations, barbecues, things like that. Yes?
Yes.
Certainly, you didn't know how Keith Caneiro and the defendant interacted with one another when nobody was around. Is that correct?
Correct.
You weren't privy to any of their private communications, right?
Private, no.
Or their interactions over the phone?
Personally, no.
No. You were not present for any of their discussions regarding business, right?
Not that I can recall. Just
Or any of their disagreements?
casual conversations, but nothing.
You didn't know anything about any financial arrangements that they had, is that correct?
Correct.
You didn't know anything about the defendant's financial situation, is that right?
Yes.
He didn't confide in you about his finances or anything like that?
No.
And you didn't know about any escalating tensions between Keith and the defendant in 2018, did you?
Objection.
Go ahead, what's your objection?
She's characterizing it as escalating, and that's argumentative.
Okay, just ask it differently.
Sure. Did you know anything about any tensions between Keith and his brother Paul in 2018?
No.
You weren't aware of any arguments that they may or may not have had, is that right?
Nothing specific, no.
You weren't aware of Keith's, any frustrations that Keith may have had with his brother Paul, is that correct?
Objection asked and answered as far as she's not aware of any of these private conversations.
I'm going to allow it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. You weren't aware of any frustrations that Keith may or may not have had with his brother Paul, is that correct?
Correct.
You weren't aware of any future plans that Keith may or may not have communicated to his brother Paul about their businesses, is that correct?
Yes. Correct.
Correct. And were you aware of any other financial situations with regard to the defendant being the trustee of an insurance policy?
I do not believe I was aware of that then.
Okay. And you were closer with Susan Caneiro than you were with Paul Caneiro?
Spent more time together, yes.
And in fact, you indicated you saw her on November 19th.
Yes.
You guys had tea together?
Yes.
All right. Did you see the defendant on that date?
I did not.
And certainly you did not see Keith on that date, is that right?
Correct.
And you weren't privy to any phone conversations that the two of them may have had or may not have had, is that correct?
Correct.
You weren't privy to who was angry, is that right?
Objection, again, just, this has been established.
I'm going to sustain the objection to the form of that question. So you can ask it differently, but I think that question is improper. Go ahead.
Ma'am, were you aware of any communications that Keith and Paul had on the night of November 19th?
No, I'm sorry.
So you were not aware of any ultimatums that Keith had given Paul that night?
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. She doesn't know, so she doesn't know. We're going to leave it there.
You indicated that you were close to Susan Caneiro. Were you aware then that she and the defendant slept in separate bedrooms?
Yes.
Were you aware that Susan actually slept in the master bedroom?
Yes.
Were you aware that the master bedroom right beneath that is the origin of the fire?
Yes.
I have nothing further, Judge.
Okay. Any redirect?
The summer of 2018, how often would you see Paul and Susan and their families?
The summer of 18, probably 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay, and how often did you see Keith and Jennifer and their kids?
Over the course of that summer, maybe 3 times.
Okay, and you also, you mentioned holidays, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and so you've known the Caneiro family for how long?
Since 1996, so 25 years at the time.
Okay, and obviously you didn't see Keith and Jennifer and their family as often as you saw Paul and Susan's family, right?
Right.
Okay, but did you see them like regularly? How often?
A couple times a year, minimum. 3, maybe 4 times a year.
And that's over the course of 20-something years?
Yes.
And did you ever, even if you weren't present with them, were there occasions where you would just learn things generally, without saying what you learned, just learn things generally about the family?
Object.
I don't know what. Come on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sustain the objection to that question, but I will allow a new question. Go ahead.
Ms. Gould, did you talk to Susan regularly?
When?
Just generally
Oh,
over the
yes.
course of all the many years you've known
Yes,
her?
absolutely.
And did you also talk to Paul regularly over the course of the many years you've known him?
Less frequently, but regularly, yes.
Regularly.
Yes.
And when you would talk to Susan and Paul, or maybe their children, was a topic of discussion often family?
Periodically. Sure.
And there were obviously a lot of questions about what you don't know, right? Was your relationship with Paul and Susan and their family, was it, and Keith and Jennifer, was it more personal or was it business?
Personal.
Okay. And obviously you can only speak to what you know, right?
Yes.
Okay. Based on what you do know, did you ever have any concerns about the relationship between Paul and Keith?
Objection.
Sustained. The form of that question.
I'll just ask you this one more time. Based on what you do know, how would you describe the closeness of Paul and Keith and their families?
They were very close. Paul loved Keith and Jen and those children.
Thank you.
You can step down, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our mid-morning break right now. Please don't discuss this case. Do any research. We'll see you back at about 10:25.